Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the heir of Batman Beyond. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain over Neo Musafu wasn't real. It was a sterile, recycled water, scheduled by the city's atmospheric regulators to fall every Tuesday and Thursday from 22 to 2300 hours. Just long enough to wash the day's grime from the chrome and glass spires and send it sluicing into the grates of the underlevels. It was efficient, clean, and utterly devoid of soul. Just like the heroes. From his seat on the maglev Skytrain, soaring silently between monolithic skyscrapers, Izuku Midoriya watched the program deluge trace patterns on the reinforced plexiglass. Below, the city was a dazzling, kinetic tapestry of light. Rivers of crimson and white flowed along the transport lanes. Holographic koi fish the size of buses swam through the air between buildings advertising Detonarat Cybernetics. And high above, the orbital ring of the Endeavor Agency's satellite blinked, a constant, watchful red eye in the starless sky. 20 years. 20 years since All Might's final, cataclysmic battle. 20 years since the symbol of peace had retired, leaving a void that was quickly, and clinically, filled. The age of heroes hadn't ended, it had been corporatized. It was now the era of Heroics Incorporated. A holographic news anchor shimmered into existence in the center of the train car, her smile as bright and artificial as the city lights. And in today's Heroics report, the number 7 pro hero, Electrosmash, successfully apprehended the larceny lizards after a thrilling 7-minute chase through the Kashimiyazaki commercial district. Collateral damage is estimated at a manageable 4.2 million yen, well within the projections of his sponsor, Volt Cola. Remember, for a spark of energy in your day, grab a Volt Cola. The old Izuku, the small, starstruck boy with eyes full of impossible dreams, would have been frantically scribbling in a notebook. He would have analyzed Electrosmash's new super move, diagrammed the villain's quirk, and gushed about his sheer power. This Izuku, a 19-year-old high school student with the same unruly green hair but with eyes that held the weary weight of cracked foundations, merely swiped a finger across his data slate. He pulled up a public city grid map and overlaid it with a private analysis program he'd coded himself. Collision vector analysis, Kashimiyazaki District. Probability of civilian endangerment during pursuit, 78%. Optimal non-destructive takedown route, bypassing the district via the old service tunnels. Time increase, 90 seconds. Collateral damage estimate, 500,000 yen. He sighed, a soft, weary sound lost in the train's quiet hum. The heroes didn't take the optimal route anymore. They took the most marketable one. The one with the most camera drones, the best lighting, the most dramatic explosions that would look good on the nightly news reel, sponsored by Volt Cola. They weren't saving people so much as fulfilling a service contract. The maglev hissed to a stop at his station. As he stepped onto the platform, the doors slid shut behind him, and the train silently rocketed away, leaving him alone with the echoing advertisements. He pulled the hood of his worn gray jacket over his head, a futile gesture against the perfectly calibrated rain. His school, a standard municipal institution for the quirk and quirkless alike, though the ratio was laughably skewed, was a 10-minute walk. It was on that walk that he saw it. Projected onto the side of a building, a promotional video for the UA Heroics program, the most prestigious hero academy in the world. And there he was, front and center, Katsuki Bakugo. He looked every bit the prodigy. His hero costume was a sleek, military-grade marvel of black and explosive orange. The video showed him in a training simulation, his expression a mask of ferocious concentration as he unleashed a controlled, city-block-leveling explosion. The caption beneath him blazed in heroic font, Dynamite, U.A. S1 Prospect. The future of offensive heroics. Izuku froze, his feet rooted to the spot. The old, phantom pains of childhood, the searing heat of small explosions against his shoulder, the sting of mocking laughter, the bitter, acid taste of the words quirkless, useless, Deku, prickled at the back of his neck. Bakugo hadn't changed. He was just as arrogant, just as powerful, just as certain of his place at the top of the world. The world had simply rearranged itself to validate his every belief. In this society, A powerful quirk wasn't just a gift, it was a currency, and Bakugo had been born a billionaire. Izuku had been born bankrupt. He felt a familiar, hollow ache in his chest. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. That had burned out years ago, leaving behind a cold, analytical resentment. He resented the system that elevated someone like Bakugo, while ignoring the core tenets of what a hero should be. Bakugo didn't want to save people, he wanted to win, and the modern world saw no difference between the two. Shaking his head, Izuku forced himself to move on, shoving his hands deep into his pockets. His dream of being a hero like All Might, a shining symbol of hope, was dead. It had died slowly, through 1,000 cuts of reality, 1,000 condescending glances from doctors and teachers, and one final, crushing conversation on a rooftop with his idol all those years ago. But a dream, when it dies, can leave a ghost. And the ghost of Izuku's dream was a persistent, whispering thing. It no longer screamed for a cape and a smile. It whispered of justice. It whispered of a world where power wasn't the only metric of worth. When he got back to his small apartment, his mother was already asleep. A note was on the kitchen counter next to a plate of katsudon, covered in plastic wrap. "Eat up, Izuku. You're studying too hard. Love, Mom." He smiled, a genuine, soft expression that rarely surfaced anymore. His mother was his one anchor in a world that felt increasingly alien. He ate the cold meal standing in the quiet of the kitchen, the city lights painting shifting colors on the walls. Afterwards, he retreated to his room. It was, to any casual observer, the room of a hero otaku. All Might figures from a bygone era lined the shelves, their triumphant smiles a stark contrast to the room's dim lighting. But the centerpiece, the nexus of his entire world, was the terminal on his desk. He sat down and pulled up his life's work. Hero Analysis for the Future. The title was a relic of a more naive time. He hadn't changed it, perhaps as a reminder of the boy he used to be. The early volumes, digitized scans of his old, burnt-smelling notebooks, were filled with childish drawings and boundless optimism. Volume 13, however, looked very different. He clicked it open. The pages were stark, filled with lines of code, network schematics, and financial records. His analysis had evolved. He no longer just analyzed heroes, he analyzed the system they propped up. His current fixation was Detonarat Cybernetics. On the surface, they were a corporate titan, the leading manufacturer of support gear for pro-heroes and the primary contractor for the city's infrastructure. But Izuku had found a thread, a tiny, almost invisible anomaly in their power consumption logs. For the past 6 months, unregistered energy spikes had been emanating from their decommissioned warehouses in the old industrial sector, the forgotten underbelly of the gleaming metropolis. These spikes correlated perfectly with flare-ups and black market activity, specifically, the sale of illegal quirk enhancement technology. The tech was crude, dangerous. Street-level villains were getting their hands on bootleg injectors and power regulators that would give their minor quirks a temporary, terrifying boost before burning them out, sometimes permanently. It was a plague, and the pro-heroes were treating the symptoms, apprehending the crazed, powered-up thugs, while the disease itself festered in the shadows. Izuku believed Detonarat was the source. But belief was not proof. For weeks, he'd been running a decryption program on a piece of encrypted data he'd skimmed from a low-security Detonarat server. Tonight, something clicked. A single file unlocked. It wasn't a master plan or a list of names. It was a shipping manifest. 1 crate. Coded destination, Dock 13, Old Toba District. Time of transfer, tonight. 23:30. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was more than just data. It was a real-world event. A chance to see the face of the corruption he'd only ever glimpsed through lines of code. He looked at the clock. 23:05. He didn't think. He acted. He grabbed a black backpack, stuffing it with his data slate, a pair of high-powered electrobinoculars, and a multi-tool. He threw on a dark, hooded rain slicker, the kind that distorted your thermal image just enough to fool low-grade security sensors. He was out of the door in less than a minute, a ghost slipping into the sterile, manufactured rain. The old Toba district was a different world. Here, the rain was real, mixing with the city's runoff to create a grimy, chemical-smelling slick on the cracked asphalt. The gleaming skyscrapers of Neo Musafu were a distant, hazy crown of light on the horizon. This was a place of rust and decay, of brick buildings stained black with a century of pollution, of shattered windows and skeletal remains of pre-quirk factories. Izuku moved through the shadows, his sneakers silent on the wet ground. His senses were on high alert, his mind racing. This was reckless. This was stupid. He was a quirkless high school student walking into a presumed meeting between a megacorporation and the criminal underworld. If he were caught, he pushed the thought away. He had to know. He found a perch on the roof of a derelict warehouse overlooking Dock 13. He lay flat on his stomach, the cold, gritty surface seeping through his clothes, and raised the binoculars to his eyes. The dock was dimly lit by a few flickering sodium lamps, casting long, distorted shadows. Below, a sleek, black Detonarat transport truck sat humming, its corporate logo barely visible in the gloom. At 23:29, two figures emerged from the shadows. The first was a man in a sharp, tailored suit that looked ridiculously out of place in the urban decay. He held a silver briefcase and moved with an air of cold, corporate authority. The second was something else. He was a wiry man with a nest of wires woven into his hair and cybernetic implants blinking on his temples. He jittered with a nervous energy, his head constantly twitching. This had to be the buyer. Izuku zoomed in, running a facial recognition search against a black market database he had access to. The result flashed on his screen: name, Kaido Scramble Tanaka. Quirk, low-level technopathy. Can cause localized electronic interference. A bottom feeder. A delivery boy. The back of the Detonarat truck hissed open. Two more men in corporate security uniforms emerged, carrying a heavy, metallic crate. They set it down with a thud. The man in the suit spoke, his voice a low, cultured murmur that the binoculars microphone barely picked up. The full consignment. 50 units of the booster module. As agreed, Scramble practically vibrated with excitement. Heh. Yeah. The boss'll be pleased. This'll give our boys the edge they need. He gestured to the briefcase. The payment. Untraceable crypto credits. The corporate man took the case, not even bothering to open it. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Tanaka. Detonarat values its discreet partners. Izuku's hands trembled, but he held the binoculars steady, recording everything. This was it. The proof. Detonarat wasn't just turning a blind eye. They were actively arming villains. But why? For profit? To create a problem only their hero support technology could solve? He adjusted his position, trying to get a clearer shot of the corporate man's face. In his focus, he dislodged a loose piece of gravel. It was a tiny sound, a pebble skittering down the corrugated roof, but in the tense silence of the dock, it sounded like a gunshot. Every head below snapped up. Scramble's eyes, alight with manic energy, locked directly onto Izuku's position. A jolt of pure, ice-cold terror shot through Izuku's veins. "We've got a rat!" Scramble shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. The lights on his temples glowed a furious red. The sodium lamps around the dock exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the area into near-total darkness. Izuku's binoculars fizzled, the screen going black with a crackle of static. Scramble's quirk. "Get him!" the corporate man yelled, his calm demeanor shattering. The two security guards drew pulse batons and started sprinting towards Izuku's building. Izuku didn't hesitate. All his analysis, all his planning, evaporated in a cloud of primal fear. He scrambled backwards, his mind a white-hot buzz of a single imperative: run. He half fell, half jumped off the back of the roof, landing hard in a pile of overflowing trash bags that mercifully broke his fall. He shot to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his ankle, and plunged into the labyrinth of alleys that crisscrossed the old district. His heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of his chest. He could hear their heavy footsteps pounding the pavement behind him, closing the distance. He was fast, agile from years of dodging bullies, but they were professionals. He risked a glance over his shoulder. One of the guards was raising his arm, aiming some kind of projectile weapon. Izuku ducked left, into a narrow gap between two buildings, just as a sizzling bolt of energy blasted a chunk out of the brick wall where his head had been. Panic gave way to desperate calculation. His mind, his greatest weapon, started to fire on all cylinders. They're funneling me west. Dead end at the old canal. Need to double back. The old sewer access on Renmer Street. Grate is rusted, but weak. He pumped his legs harder, the manufactured rain plastering his hood to his face, his breath coming in ragged, burning gasps. He skidded around a corner, and saw his chance. A fire escape ladder. He leaped, catching the bottom rung and pulling himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. He climbed frantically, the metal rungs slick and cold beneath his desperate grip. He reached the roof just as one of the guards appeared below. Izuku didn't stop. He ran across the rooftop, his knowledge of the city's forgotten architecture his only guide. He leaped a 4-meter gap to the next building, landing with a jarring roll that sent a fresh wave of pain through his ankle. He kept moving, a phantom flitting across the rooftops of a dead district. But they were relentless. He could hear scrambles, whoops, and yells from the streets below, and occasionally a light would short out or a security camera would swivel wildly as he passed. The technopath was tracking him. He was running out of options, being herded towards the city limits. The old district began to thin out, giving way to an overgrown, unkempt forest that had been left to grow wild around the city's edge. He saw a fence in the distance, a tall, imposing barrier of wrought iron. Beyond it, shrouded in mist and shadow, stood a dark, hulking silhouette. A building. But it was unlike anything in Neo Musafu. It was old, angular, and Gothic, with sharp gables and stone buttresses. It looked like a transplanted piece of a forgotten western continent, a ghost of a different time. It was his only choice. He pushed himself into a final, desperate sprint, the guards closing in behind him. The forest floor was a treacherous mess of roots and mud. A branch whipped across his face, leaving a stinging cut on his cheek. He could hear them now, right behind him, their heavy breathing and the crackle of their energy weapons. The iron fence loomed before him. It was topped with wicked-looking spikes. There was no time to find a gate. It was over or through. With the last of his strength, he launched himself at the fence. His fingers found purchase on the cold iron bars. He pulled, hauled, his body screaming with 1,000 different kinds of pain. He got one foot onto a crossbar, then the other. He was halfway up when a hand clamped around his already injured ankle. "Got you!" A gruff voice snarled. Izuku cried out, kicking wildly with his free foot. His heel connected with something hard, a nose, judging by the wet crunch and the sudden, pained grunt. The hand let go. He scrambled the rest of the way up, throwing himself recklessly over the spiked top. He felt a sharp tear as the fabric of his jacket and the skin of his side caught on one of the points, but he was over. He fell, tumbling down the other side onto soft, mossy earth. He lay there for a moment, gasping for air, the world a dizzying, painful blur. He pushed himself up, looking back through the bars. The 2 guards were there, glaring at him, but they made no move to follow. They looked at the grounds beyond the fence with a strange, almost superstitious fear. "Let him go," one of them muttered, cradling his broken nose. "No one goes in there. The place is haunted." Scramble appeared, his wired hair dripping. "What?" "He's right there. Let's go get him." "No," the other guard said, his voice firm. "Our contract is with Detnerat, not with whatever ghost lives in that place. The target is lost. We report back." They turned and retreated into the darkness, dragging a protesting scramble with them. Izuku watched them go, his body finally succumbing to its limits. The adrenaline that had fueled his flight vanished, leaving behind an ocean of pain and exhaustion. His ankle throbbed with a searing heat, his side was bleeding freely, and his lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. He was safe. He had escaped. He was on the grounds of some forgotten, haunted estate on the edge of the world. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the damp earth, the last of his strength deserting him. His vision swam, the edges turning dark. Through the rain and the encroaching blackness, he looked up at the source of the guard's fear. The manor was a colossal beast of stone and shadow, a true Gothic nightmare. Gargoyles that were not decorations but silent, brooding sentinels stared down from the eaves. The windows were dark, vacant eyes, watching him with an ancient, cold indifference. A single, gnarled tree stood in the courtyard, its branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the perpetually overcast sky. The entire place radiated an aura of profound, soul-deep loneliness. At the base of the grand, weathered oak doors, a name was carved into a stone plaque, so faded by time and acid rain that it was almost illegible. But Izuku's sharp eyes could just make it out. Wayne. The name meant nothing to him. It was just a word. His head was light, his thoughts unraveling. The recording on his data slate, the proof, he had to. His world tilted, the imposing silhouette of the manor wavering like a heat mirage. The cold of the mud seeped into his bones, a final, chilling embrace. His last conscious thought was not of heroes, or villains, or the corrupt world he so desperately wanted to fix. It was a simple, childish thought, a fragment of an old urban legend his grandfather used to tell him, a pre-quirk myth from a fallen American city, a story of a winged creature that hunted criminals in the night. A ghost, he thought, as his eyes slid shut and the world dissolved into nothing. The ghost of Gotham. He lay there, a broken, quirkless boy at the gates of a forgotten legacy, unaware that he had just stumbled into the graveyard of one legend, and onto the proving grounds of another. The sterile, programmed rain of Neo Musafu continued to fall, washing the blood from his side into the thirsty, waiting earth of the manor grounds, and from a high, dark window in the west wing of the house, a pair of ancient, piercingly blue eyes watched him, unblinking, from the shadows. The first sensation was sound. A slow, rhythmic beep, as steady and indifferent as a tombstone. It was the only landmark in an ocean of darkness. Next came the smell, a sterile, biting scent of antiseptic mingling with something ancient and damp, like a freshly opened cellar or a deep, forgotten cave. Then came the pain, a dull, comprehensive ache that had settled deep in his bones, punctuated by a sharp, rhythmic throbbing from his ankle and a fiery sting along his right side. Izuku Midoriya's eyes fluttered open, but the darkness remained absolute. He was lying on his back, on something firm but not uncomfortable. A cot, maybe? He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over him, and a firm, invisible pressure on his shoulder gently but inexorably pushed him back down. "Don't move," a voice said. It was a sound that seemed to be dredged up from the very bedrock of the earth, a low, gravelly rasp, heavy with age and disuse, yet carrying an undeniable core of authority. It was the voice of a man who had not needed to raise it to be obeyed in a very, very long time. Izuku's heart, which had been beating in a slow, pained rhythm, kicked into a frantic staccato. "Who? Where am I?" he managed, his own voice a dry, cracking whisper. The darkness shifted. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows, and a silhouette resolved itself against the faint, distant light source. It was the shape of a man, tall and gaunt, leaning heavily on a cane. The rhythmic thump, click, of the cane on stone floor echoed in the vast, unseen space as he approached. "You're on my property!" "You collapsed," the voice stated, each word a clipped, precise shard of information. "The intruders who were chasing you have been dealt with. Your injuries have been tended to. Now, answer my question. Who are you, and what were you doing at my gate?" Izuku's mind, foggy with pain and disorientation, struggled to catch up. The chase. Dead Narat. The fall. The fence. The haunted manor. It all came rushing back in a disjointed, terrifying collage. I'm Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya," he stammered, trying to get a better look at his captor, or savior. The figure remained an inscrutable silhouette. I saw something I shouldn't have. They chased me. I was just trying to get away. You saw corporate thugs engaged in an illegal transaction in a derelict district." The old man corrected him, his tone flat and devoid of surprise. "You recorded them, and in your haste to escape, you led them directly to me." A remarkably foolish sequence of events. How did he know? Izuku's backpack. He twisted his head, spotting the bag on a small metal table beside the cot. His data slate was on top of it, the screen dark. Of course, the old man had gone through his things. "I didn't mean to lead them here," Izuku said, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm sorry. I'll leave. Just please don't call the authorities. What I have on that slate is important." A dry, mirthless chuckle echoed in the dark. The authorities? The man scoffed, the words dripping with a contempt so profound it felt ancient. They are the last people I would call. As for leaving. The silhouette shifted, and with a groan of protesting metal, a single, starkly white overhead lamp switched on, illuminating the immediate area in a harsh, clinical glare. Izuku squinted, his eyes watering. The man was old. Older than anyone Izuku had ever seen up close. His face was a roadmap of a hard life, a topography of sharp angles, deep-set wrinkles, and pale, crisscrossing scars that stood out against his papery skin. White hair, thin but still stubbornly present, was slicked back from a high, imposing forehead. But it was his eyes that held Izuku captive. They were a startling, piercing blue, sunk deep in shadowy sockets, and they burned with a cold, analytical fire that seemed entirely at odds with the frailty of his frame. He wore simple, dark gray loungewear, but he carried himself with the unbent posture of a king in exile, and Izuku's analytical mind, a machine that never truly switched off, began to churn, even through the fog of pain and fear. The cane the man held wasn't just a simple support. It was made of a graphite composite, Izuku guessed, with a weighted head that was almost certainly reinforced. A tool, yes, but also a weapon. The man's stance, though reliant on the cane, was perfectly balanced, his weight distributed with an economy of motion that spoke of a lifetime of training. The scars on his knuckles were old, faded, but distinct, the kind a man got from hitting things, or people, without gloves. Then his eyes took in his surroundings. He wasn't in a bedroom, or a clinic. He was in some kind of workshop. A medical bay? The equipment around him was unlike anything he had ever seen. The floor stand next to him wasn't feeding him simple saline. A small, integrated diagnostic screen was cycling through his vitals, displaying his heart rate, blood toxicity, and cellular regeneration rate in real time. The liquid in the bag was a complex, faintly glowing solution. The biomonitor he was hooked up to was a seamless band of dark metal, not the adhesive pads used in hospitals. This wasn't commercial technology. This was bespoke, military grade perhaps, but even that felt inadequate. This was a generation beyond anything available on the open market. He looked at his own body. His torn, bloody clothes were gone, replaced by a simple black t-shirt and pants. A synth-skin bandage, cool and smooth, was sealed over the gash on his side. He tentatively flexed his ankle. It was still sore, but the sharp, stabbing pain was gone, replaced by a dull ache. It had been expertly splinted and wrapped. "You've suffered a hairline fracture of the fibula, severe bruising, and a laceration that required 7 dermal staples," the old man said, noticing his inspection. His voice was impatient. "The regenerative solution in the 4 will accelerate the healing process. You should be able to walk, with difficulty, in an hour. Then you will leave my property and forget you were ever here." He turned to leave, the finality in his tone like a closing vault door. "Wait!" Izuku called out, pushing himself up onto his elbows. The world spun, but he gritted his teeth and forced it to stabilize. "Please! You have to tell me where I am. Who are you?" The man paused, his back to Izuku. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady drip of water somewhere in the vast, echoing darkness beyond the single light. The space felt immense, cavernous. It smelled of ozone, cold stone, and oil. "I am a man who values his privacy," he said without turning around. "A privacy you have compromised. Be grateful for my generosity and do not press your luck, boy." Before Izuku could reply, a new sound cut through the quiet. It wasn't a loud, blaring alarm, but a soft 3-note chime that seemed to emanate from the shadows. The old man stiffened. He turned, his movements suddenly losing their aged slowness, and limped with surprising speed toward a wall of darkness. He pressed a hand against the stone, and a section of it lit up, revealing itself to be a massive, dark glass monitor. On the screen, a series of high-definition security feeds flickered to life, showing the perimeter fence from multiple angles. And there they were, the 2 Detenrat guards and the twitching, wired-up man, scramble. They hadn't given up. They were at the main gate, a colossal structure of iron and stone. "They found me," Izuku whispered, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. "They found us." The old man corrected, his voice a low, dangerous growl. On the screen, Scramble placed his hands on the electronic lock of the gate. The lights on his temples flared. His quirk, Izuku said, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive, overriding his fear. It's technopathy. He can short out electronics. He's going to fry the gate controls. I am aware of what he is attempting. The old man said dismissively, his long, gnarled fingers hovering over a keyboard that had risen silently from a console beneath the screen. But it's the wrong approach, Izuku blurted out, the words tumbling out of him before he could stop them. That gate, it looks pre-quirk. The construction is too solid, the mechanics too overt. The electronic lock has to be a modern addition, a retrofit. A designer that paranoid would have included a mechanical failsafe, maybe a deadbolt system that engages when the electronics fail. He's not disabling the lock, he's securing it. The old man's fingers froze an inch above the keyboard. He didn't turn, but Izuku could feel the weight of his attention shift, like a massive searchlight swiveling to focus entirely on him. Izuku's mouth was dry, but he couldn't stop. The puzzle was laid out before him, and he had to solve it. And the guards? He continued, pointing a shaky finger at the screen. Their formation is standard corporate enforcement doctrine for a frontal assault. They're expecting resistance from the front, ready to breach and clear. But look, he pointed to two stone gargoyles perched atop the gate pillars, half hidden in shadow. The line of sight. They're completely exposed from above and to the sides. They're so focused on the door they're ignoring the frame. Silence. The old man slowly turned his head, his piercing blue eyes fixing Izuku with an intensity that made the boy feel like he was being x-rayed. There was no anger in his expression now. There was something else. A flicker of surprise. A spark of something Izuku couldn't name. It was like watching a statue come to life. You have a tactical analysis quirk? The man asked, his voice losing some of its dismissive edge, replaced by a sharp, clinical curiosity. Izuku flinched, the old shame rising like bile in his throat. No, he mumbled, looking down at the thin blanket covering him. I'm quirkless. He expected a scoff, a dismissive grunt, the usual blend of pity and contempt. Instead, the old man was silent for a full 10 seconds. He just stared, his gaze unreadable. Then, he turned back to the console. Impressive, he said, the single word hanging in the air, heavier than any praise Izuku had ever received. On the screen, Scramble shrieked in frustration as the gate lock, instead of opening, audibly clanked shut with a series of heavy thuds. The mechanical deadbolts. Izuku had been right. Plan B, you idiots! Scramble yelled, pointing at the wall. One of the guards unslung a heavy pack from his back, which began to hum with energy. A plasma cutter. The old man's lips thinned into a bloodless line. They are trespassing, he murmured, more to himself than to Izuku. They are attempting to breach my home. A proportional response is required. His fingers danced across the keyboard. It was not the slow, deliberate pecking of an old man, but the fluid, practiced motions of a master musician. He typed a short string of commands, his movements precise and economical. He hit the enter key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, outside, the world erupted in a symphony of controlled, non-lethal violence. Izuku watched, mesmerized, on the monitor. The stone gargoyles' eyes glowed a sudden, malevolent red. With the sound of grinding stone, their mouths opened, revealing not stone throats but the barrels of advanced turret systems. They didn't fire projectiles. They fired thick, gelatinous rounds of high density, fast-acting adhesive foam. The two guards were instantly encased from the chest down, pinned to the wall, their plasma cutter sputtering uselessly as it was smothered. They struggled, but they were trapped as surely as flies in amber. Scramble shrieked and tried to run, but a section of the ground at his feet slid away, revealing a pit. He tumbled in, his cry cut short as he landed on a thick, inflatable cushion that instantly enveloped him. Simultaneously, a high-frequency sonic pulse, inaudible to the human ear but visible as a distortion wave on the camera feed, washed over the area. The electronics on the guard's gear, and the cybernetics in Scramble's head, sparked and died. The entire engagement had lasted less than 5 seconds. It was brutally efficient, terrifyingly precise, and utterly silent. The intruders were neutralized, conscious but completely incapacitated. Izuku stared, his mouth agape. This wasn't a security system. It was a tactical defense grid. The kind of thing only a nation-state, or a paranoid billionaire with a private army, could design. The old man leaned back, a flicker of something like grim satisfaction on his face. He looked at the neutralized thugs on the screen, then his gaze shifted to Izuku, who was still sitting up on the cot, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and absolute, unadulterated awe. "No," the old man said, his voice returning to its low, gravelly tone. "We were discussing your departure. I believe the circumstances have changed." He pressed another button on the console. There was a low hum, and the darkness that had surrounded them began to recede. Lights flickered on, one after another, in a cascading wave that spread out into the vastness. And Izuku Midoriya finally saw where he was. His breath caught in his throat. His mind, which had been racing, simply stopped. He was in a cave. A colossal, natural cavern that stretched into the darkness further than the lights could penetrate. The ceiling was a canopy of jagged stalactites, lost in the gloom hundreds of feet above. A subterranean river flowed through one section, its surface black and still, and a multi-leveled series of platforms and walkways had been built over and around the natural rock formations. But it was what the cave held that stole his breath. To his right, on a raised central platform, sat a vehicle under a vast, grey tarp. But even shrouded, its shape was unmistakable, long, low, and aggressive, with pointed fins that jutted out like the wings of some great, mechanical beast. Further back, he could see other, smaller vehicles, including a sleek, black motorcycle. To his left was a series of glass display cases, lit from within. They were empty, save one. In it, a small, brightly colored uniform of red, green, and yellow was mounted on a mannequin. It was torn and scorched in several places. A plaque beneath it was too far away to read, but the sense of profound grief and loss that emanated from it was a palpable force. There was a massive computer system, a bank of monitors that made Izuku's own home-built terminal look like a child's toy. An armory, its walls lined with strange, bat-shaped projectiles and complex-looking gadgets. A fully equipped crime lab, with electron microscopes and gas spectrometers that looked decades ahead of their time, and there were the trophies. A gigantic, oversized penny leaning against one wall. A life-sized, animatronic Tyrannosaurus Rex that stood silent and menacing in a shadowed alcove. A collection of oversized playing cards. Izuku's mind, a library of facts and analysis, found itself utterly empty. There was no frame of reference for this. It was a place outside of logic, outside of the neatly categorized world of quirks and heroes he knew. This was a lair. A sanctuary? A tomb. What is this place? He breathed, his voice barely a whisper. The old man walked, thump, click, over to the central computer. He looked around at the cavern, at the relics of a life lived in the shadows. His expression was not one of pride, but of immense, soul-crushing weariness. As if he were the curator of his own mausoleum. A monument to a failed idea, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of unspoken history. A relic from a time before the world decided it preferred its saviors to be celebrities. He turned to face Izuku fully, the lights of the cave casting long, dramatic shadows across his ancient, scarred face. You've read the history books, boy. The pre-Quark era. The Age of Man. But there are stories, legends, that are not taught in your schools. They are dismissed as myths, the whispers of a world before powers made everything so simple. He gestured to the cavern around them. This place was born from one of those myths. A myth about a man. A man with no powers, no quirk. A man who decided that the criminals of his city, the corrupt and the superstitious, were a cowardly lot. A man who chose to use their fear against them. He became a symbol. A ghost. A dark night. Izuku's blood ran cold. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. The name on the gate. The Gothic Manor. The cave. The bat-shaped projectiles. The urban legend his grandfather had told him, a story he'd dismissed as a fairy tale. The ghost of Gotham City. No, Izuku whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. It can't be. He wasn't real. He was real. the old man stated, his voice absolute. And he was necessary. For a time. He tapped his own chest with a gnarled finger. My name is Bruce Wayne, and a long, long time ago, in a city that has since crumbled to dust, I was the Batman. The words hung in the cavernous air, as heavy and as real as the stone around them. Izuku stared at the bitter, broken old man standing before him, and saw not a frail senior citizen, but the living ghost of a legend. He had stumbled not just onto a forgotten estate, but into the heart of a myth that had been quietly living in seclusion in Japan for decades, watching the world change, watching heroism become a commodity, watching men like All Might rise and fall, all from the shadows of his self-imposed exile. He was disgusted with what the world had become. Izuku could see it in the profound disappointment etched into the lines of his face. He had retreated from a world that no longer had a place for his brand of justice. Izuku looked from Bruce Wayne, to the silent, menacing Batmobile, to the somber, empty display cases that spoke of lost allies and forgotten battles. He thought of the corrupt, sterile world outside, the world of Heroics Incorporated and Degenerate Cybernetics. He thought of Bakugo, the symbol of this new age, a hero defined by his power and his ego, and he realized that Bruce Wayne was wrong. The world hadn't outgrown the need for Batman. It needed him now more than ever. Izuku woke to the chilling damp of the cave. For a disoriented moment, he thought the previous night had been a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by pain and exhaustion. Then he saw it, across the vast stone floor, the silent, hulking shape of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and reality came crashing back with the force of a physical blow. Bruce Wayne. Batman. The myth was real, and he was sleeping in its heart. He sat up on the cot, his body a symphony of aches. His ankle was still tightly wrapped, but when he put weight on it, the pain was a manageable throb, not the white-hot agony of before. The regenerative solution had worked wonders. He was wearing the same simple black clothes from the night before, feeling small and utterly insignificant amidst the monumental relics of a bygone war on crime. The rhythmic thump, click, of the cane announced Bruce's arrival. The old man emerged from the shadows near a staircase that presumably led up into the manor. He was carrying a tray. On it were 2 gray, protein paste pouches and a single glass of water. He placed the tray on the table next to Izuku's cot without a word. Good morning, Izuku offered, his voice sounding small and thin in the cavern. It's afternoon, Bruce corrected, his voice a gravelly rasp. He gestured to one of the pouches. Eat. It contains the caloric and nutrient equivalent of 3 balanced meals. Izuku picked it up. It was cold and vaguely gelatinous. He squeezed a bit of the gray paste into his mouth. It was utterly tasteless, with the texture of fine sand mixed with grease. He swallowed it down with a grimace, his stomach churning in protest. Bruce watched him, his face an unreadable mask of stone. Last night you stumbled into my life. You brought danger to my doorstep. By all rights, I should have erased your memory of this place and left you in a public park. Izuku's blood ran cold. Erased my memory? A useful application of a low-frequency sonic pulse combined with a precise neuroelectric suggestion. Messy. Unreliable at times. But effective, Bruce stated, as if discussing the weather. He leaned on his cane, the weight of his gaze pinning Izuku to the cot. But you are unique. Your analysis of the intruder's tactics, your immediate grasp of their weaknesses, all without a quirk to aid you, that is a rare talent. A dangerous one, in the wrong hands. He paused, letting the silence stretch. You are investigating Degenerate Cybernetics. So am I. For decades I have watched this city from a distance. I have seen the rot of commercialized heroism fester. I have seen corporations like Degenerate grow fat and powerful in the shadows cast by the so-called pillars of justice. They are a cancer, and their recent activities, arming low-level criminals with unstable technology, suggests their illness is entering its terminal phase. His voice was a low, simmering cauldron of contempt. This was not the academic curiosity of Izuku's investigation. This was a deep, personal hatred, honed over a lifetime of witnessing corruption. I am too old to fight this war myself, Bruce continued, his eyes glancing at his own trembling hand before he clenched it into a fist. My body is a ruin. But my mind, and my resources, are still formidable. You, boy, have a sharp mind, a reckless disregard for your own safety, and a reason to want Detonarat exposed. You have the motivation. I have the means. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew what was coming. The ghost of a dream he thought long dead began to stir within him. This is not a partnership, Bruce said, his tone sharp and clinical, as if sensing and immediately wanting to crush the boy's nascent hope. This is a temporary arrangement. An alignment of interests. I will provide you with the tools to move through the city as a ghost, to gather the intelligence I need. You will be my agent. You will follow my instructions to the letter. In return, you will get the proof you need to burn Detonarat to the ground. When it is over, we part ways. Is that understood? It wasn't an offer to be a hero. It wasn't a chance to be the next All Might. It was a devil's bargain offered in the depths of the earth by a bitter old man. It was dark, dangerous, and a complete betrayal of the bright, shining path he had once idolized. Yes, Izuku said, without a moment's hesitation. The word was out of his mouth before he'd even fully processed the question. The desperate, clawing need to do something, to be more than a useless, quirkless Deku, overwhelmed everything else. Yes, I understand. I'll do it. A flicker of something, surprise? Respect, passed through Bruce's cold eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. Good, he grunted. Finish your meal. Your training begins immediately. An hour later, after finishing the rest of the nutrient paste and being subjected to a rigorous medical scan that catalogued every flaw and weakness in his underdeveloped physique, Izuku followed Bruce to a secluded section of the cave. A sleek, black, coffin-like pillar stood alone on a circular platform, humming with a low, latent energy. To move in my world, you cannot be seen, Bruce explained, his voice echoing slightly. You must be more than a man. You must be a symbol. A terror. But you are a quirkless boy with a fractured ankle. Your body is a liability. Therefore, it must be protected. Compensated for. He placed his hand on a small, recessed panel on the pillar. With a hiss of pneumatics, the pillar split open, panels of black metal retracting into the main body, revealing what was inside. Izuku stopped breathing. It was a suit. But calling it a suit was like calling a star a light bulb. It was impossibly black, a shade that seemed to drink the light around it. It was humanoid, but its lines were too sharp, too aggressive, to be merely human. It was all sleek, overlapping plates of what looked like hardened muscle fiber, with no visible seams or joints. There was no cape. The cowl was angular and predatory, with two pointed ears that swept back like horns. The faceplate was a smooth, featureless mirror of black, and in the center of the chest, a stylized bat symbol glowed a soft, menacing crimson. The bat suit Mark 7, Bruce said, his voice laced with the creator's detached pride. But I always called it the Beyond suit. It was the last one I ever designed. The last one I ever wore. He gestured for Izuku to come closer. Hesitantly, Izuku limped forward, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the chest plate. The material was cool and strangely yielding, like hardened rubber, but he knew instinctively it was stronger than steel. Liquid metal memory polymer bonded to a microweave of reinforced carbon nanotubes. Bruce explained, seeing his curiosity. It's lightweight, flexible, and can withstand sustained fire from most small arms, as well as blades and blunt force trauma. The entire surface is a variable opacity camouflage system, capable of rendering you virtually invisible in shadow. He pointed to the gauntlets. Retractable claws, grapnel launchers, and a high-voltage electrical discharge system. He indicated the boots. Magnetic saws and high-powered propulsion jets for limited flight and enhanced mobility. He tapped the side of the cowl. A fully integrated neurokinetic interface. The suit links directly to your brain waves. In time, it will move as you think. The cowl provides multi-spectrum visual modes, an encrypted comm link, and a full sensory input suite. He looked Izuku directly in the eye, his expression grim. It amplifies your strength tenfold. It makes you faster. It makes you tougher. It will keep you alive, but do not make the mistake of thinking this. He tapped the glowing red symbol. Gives you power. It is a tool. Nothing more. The suit does not make the man. It just keeps him alive long enough to do the job. And the job is all that matters. Izuku stared at the crimson symbol. It was more than a logo. It was a promise. A threat. It was the distillation of one man's entire life of rage and loss and unbreakable will. And he was about to put it on. Getting into the suit was a strange and invasive experience. It opened from the back, and as Izuku stepped in, the liquid metal polymer seemed to flow around him, sealing him in with a series of soft clicks. The moment the cowl locked into place, his world changed. Darkness. Then, a flood. Neuralink active. Calibrating. A calm, feminine, computerized voice spoke directly into his mind. A heads-up display flickered to life across his vision. A cascade of green and blue data streams. He saw his own heart rate, the suit's power levels, an atmospheric analysis of the cave, a topological map of the floor. Then the sensory input kicked in. It was an assault. The enhanced hearing picked up everything: the drip of water from a stalactite 100 meters away, the hum of the central computer, the scuttling of a rat in a far-off tunnel, the faint, wheezing rhythm of Bruce's own breathing. It was a cacophony of noise that threatened to overwhelm him. Focus! Bruce's voice cut through the chaos, patched directly into his ear through the comlink. It was cold and clear. Filter it. The suit is listening to your subconscious. Command it to isolate my voice. Push everything else to the background. Izuku closed his eyes, not that it made a difference inside the featureless cowl, and concentrated. He pictured Bruce's voice as a single, clear thread in a tangled mess of sound. Slowly, miraculously, the other noises faded, becoming a low, ambient hum. Good, Bruce said. Now visual. Cycle through the modes. Command word vision mode thermal. Vision mode thermal. Izuku whispered, his voice coming out as a low, menacing electronic growl, filtered through the suit's modulator. The world shifted. The cave became a surreal landscape of blues, yellows, and reds. He could see the heat signature of the computer core, the cold spots on the floor where water pooled, and the bright, warm shape of Bruce Wayne standing 20 feet away. He could even see the slightly warmer outline of the man's artificial hip joint. It was too much. It was incredible. Walk, Bruce commanded. Izuku took a step. The suit, amplifying his strength, turned his tentative movement into a powerful, lurching stride. He stumbled, catching himself before he fell. The sheer power was intoxicating and terrifying. He felt like a toddler piloting a mech suit. You lack control, Bruce's voice stated, laced with disapproval. Your movements are inefficient. You will learn. Now for the real test. Propulsion system. Command boot jets, 10% thrust. Izuku's mind raced. Flight. Just like All Might. He could picture it, soaring through the cave with grace and power. Boot jets, he said, a grin spreading across his face beneath the mask. 10% thrust. The result was not graceful. A violent, concussive force erupted from the soles of his feet, launching him not upwards, but forwards and sideways. He yelled in surprise as he shot across the cavern floor, completely out of control. He flailed his arms, which only made him spin. He caromed off a large rock outcropping with a loud clang that sent vibrations through his entire body, then pinwheeled towards the giant penny. Control your center of gravity, you idiot! Bruce yelled, his voice losing its calm detachment. Use short, controlled bursts. Don't just hold it down. Izuku tried to correct his trajectory, firing another burst. This one sent him spiraling up towards the ceiling. He saw the stalactites rushing towards him and yelped, cutting the power. He dropped like a stone, landing in a heap of flailing limbs and scraped polymer on the platform next to the shrouded Batmobile, his pride and his body equally bruised. The suit had protected him from any real harm, but he could feel the phantom impact in every joint. He lay there, groaning. Through the comm link, he could hear Bruce let out a long, suffering sigh. The process will be longer than I anticipated, the old man muttered. 2 hours of grueling, humiliating practice later, Izuku could manage a controlled hover and a clumsy, lurching forward flight. He had a new appreciation for the sheer skill and power it took for heroes with flight quirks to make it look so effortless. Bruce, apparently deciding that was passable for now, called him back to the main computer. On the central monitor was a detailed schematic of a large, anonymous-looking warehouse in the industrial sector. Your target, Bruce said, all business once more. Detonarat Offline Storage Facility 3. According to their network, it's a dead storage site, holding decommissioned server hardware. Minimal security, mostly automated. But the energy spikes I've been tracking originate from this area. I believe they are using it as a transfer point. Your objective is simple: get in, locate the primary server room on sublevel 2, and retrieve a specific data drive from server rack 7B. It should be marked with this symbol. A complex alphanumeric code flashed on the screen. You will enter through the primary roof ventilation shaft here. Bruce highlighted a path in red. Automated drones patrol the main floor on a fixed, 90-second loop. The sublevels are monitored by pressure plates and infrared sensors. The schematics I am downloading into the suit's memory will show you the blind spots. Get in, get the drive, get out. Is that clear? What if there are guards? Izuku asked, his voice still distorted by the modulator. There should not be. But if there are, you do not engage. I repeat, you do not engage. Bruce's voice was hard as iron. You are not ready for a fight. Your only advantage is stealth. You are a rumor. A ghost. A whisper in the dark. The moment you are seen, the moment you get into a fistfight, you lose that advantage. You will retrieve the drive and you will leave no trace that you were ever there. Am I understood? Yes, Izuku said, the weight of the command settling on him. He wasn't a hero charging in to save the day. He was a spy. A burglar. The suit's camouflage system will make you all but invisible in low light, so long as you remain still, Bruce added. Now go. And do not fail. With a deep, steadying breath, Izuku walked to the edge of the platform overlooking the subterranean river. He engaged the boot jets, this time with a controlled, 20% burst. He rose into the air, wobbling precariously for a moment before finding his balance. He gave a hesitant nod to the shadowed figure of Bruce Wayne below, then turned and flew, clumsily but with purpose, down a wide tunnel that sloped upwards towards the surface, into the night of Neo Musafu. The flight to the warehouse was terrifying. The wind buffeted him, and the sheer sensory input of the city at night, even filtered through the suit's systems, was dizzying. But as he soared silently between the grimy buildings of the industrial sector, a shadow among shadows, a feeling of exhilaration began to bubble up through the fear. He was doing it. He was actually doing it. He was moving through the world in a way he had only ever dreamed of, on his way to uncover a truth that could change everything. He landed, with more of a controlled crash than a landing, on the roof of the target warehouse. The night was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of the city and the whisper of the wind. I'm here, he whispered into the comlink. I see you, Bruce's voice replied, and Izuku realized with a jolt that the old man was likely watching through the suit's own visual feed. The ventilation shaft is 12 meters to your left. Proceed. Izuku engaged the camouflage system. He watched in amazement as the surface of his own gauntlet seemed to shimmer, and then resolve into a perfect copy of the grimy rooftop gravel beneath them. He was a distortion in the air, a heat shimmer. A ghost. He moved to the ventilation shaft, the schematics of the building superimposed over his vision. He prized the grate open with ease. The suit's amplified strength made the rusted metal feel like cardboard, and slipped inside. The interior was dark, cavernous, and cold. Just as Bruce had said, the main floor was patrolled by two squat, disc-shaped security drones that hummed along their pre-programmed routes. Izuku moved silently in the rafters above them, his magnetic saws clinging to the steel beams, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs. He felt a surge of confidence. He could do this. This was just like his analysis, just like the simulations. He found the access hatch to the sublevels and slipped through, descending into a sterile, white corridor. The infrared grids were exactly where the schematics said they would be. He moved through them with a slow, deliberate grace, his body contorting in ways he didn't know were possible, the flexible suit moving with him. He reached the server room. The door was locked with a simple electronic keypad. A problem, but not an insurmountable one. The keypad is a standard Detonarat model, he whispered to Bruce. I've studied them. If I can create a small, localized EMP, It should default the lock to an open state for 1.2 seconds. There was a pause on the other end. The suit's electrical discharge system is designed for incapacitating biological targets. The output is too high. You'll fry the entire network and alert every security station in a 5-block radius. Izuku's mind raced, his analytical instincts taking over. Not if I channel it through a precise point, the wiring conduit on the floor next to the door. If I send the charge into the ground wire, the surge should be contained to this specific circuit. Another pause, this one longer. The theory is sound, Bruce admitted, his voice tight with what sounded like grudging approval. Proceed. But if you are wrong, I will personally deactivate your boot jets from 1,000 feet up. Izuku knelt, placing a single fingertip against the exposed conduit. He focused, commanding the suit to release the smallest possible charge. A tiny blue spark leaped from his finger. The light on the keypad flickered and died. He heard the lock click open. He pushed the door and slipped inside, the lock re-engaging behind him. He was in. The room was filled with rows upon rows of humming server racks. He scanned the labels, his enhanced vision picking out the small print. 7A. 7B. There it was. He located the drive, a small, black rectangle with the specific code Bruce had shown him, and gently prized it from its port. He had it. Mission accomplished. That's when he heard the voices. They were coming from the corridor. He froze, every muscle tensing. Bruce had said there would be no guards. Can't believe they've got us pulling a double on a dead site. One voice grumbled. There's nothing down here but old junk. Hey, orders are orders. A second voice replied. Management wants a surprise inspection of the offline archives. Just sweep the sublevels and we can get back to the gatehouse for a coffee. 2 human guards. An unscheduled patrol. They weren't on the schematics. You have the drive. Get out now. Bruce's voice was an urgent hiss in his ear. Use the emergency maintenance shaft behind rack 11. Go! Izuku moved, his stealth forgotten in a wave of panic. He rounded the end of rack 9 and saw them, 2 men in standard Detonarat security uniforms, walking slowly down the hall, their flashlights cutting beams through the dim light. Between him and the escaped shaft, he ducked back behind the servers, his heart hammering. He activated his camouflage, pressing himself flat against the cold metal of the rack. The guards were getting closer. He could hear their footsteps, the jingle of keys on a belt. They were going to walk right past his position. Then, the worst possible thing happened. A single drop of condensation from an overhead pipe chose that exact moment to fall, landing squarely on Izuku's invisible shoulder. It didn't bounce off, it hit the camo field and spread, creating a brief, shimmering, man-shaped distortion in the air. It was only for a second, but it was enough. What was that? The first guard said, stopping. He raised his flashlight, the beam playing over the spot where Izuku stood, frozen. The beam passed right through him, but the guard was suspicious. He took a step closer. Abort! Get out of there now! Bruce commanded, his voice frantic. But Izuku saw something else. He saw the guard step directly under a heavy ceiling-mounted conduit tray, one that his suit's structural analysis flagged as having a corroded primary bolt. The guard's heavy footsteps had vibrated the floor just enough. With a groan of tortured metal, the bolt gave way. The entire massive tray, laden with heavy cables, tilted and began to fall, directly towards the unsuspecting guard's head. There was no time to shout a warning. There was no time to think. There was only the image of a person about to die. Bruce was screaming in his ear to run. To escape. To protect the mission. Izuku disobeyed. He broke from the shadows in a black and red blur, the camouflage system flickering off. The 2 guards yelled in shock and terror at the sudden appearance of what looked like a demon from a nightmare. Izuku ignored them. He fired a 2-second burst from his boot jets, crossing the 10 feet between them in a heartbeat. He slammed into the targeted guard, tackling him with the force of a freight train. They hit the ground in a tangle of limbs as the conduit tray crashed down with a deafening, echoing clang onto the spot where the guard had been standing, sending sparks flying. Izuku raised his head. The other guard was fumbling for his sidearm, his face a mask of pure terror. The man Izuku had saved was staring up at him, his eyes wide with disbelief. The mission was blown. He had left a witness. He had failed. But a man was alive who should be dead. The suit's voice modulator crackled to life, deeper and more menacing than he intended. "Stay down," he growled. Then he fired his boot jets again, launching himself towards the emergency shaft. He smashed through the flimsy grate, ignoring the alarms that now blared through the facility, and rocketed up into the blessed darkness of the night sky, the data drive clutched tightly in his fist. He landed back in the Batcave with all the grace of a dropped sack of bricks, skidding across the stone floor and coming to a stop at Bruce's feet. The suit was scraped and dented. He was shaking, not from fear, but from a dizzying cocktail of adrenaline and a terrifying, profound sense of accomplishment. He expected to be yelled at. He expected to be dismissed, to have the suit taken away. Bruce was silent. He stood there, leaning on his cane, his face shrouded in the cave's shadows. The silence was worse than any shouting. Izuku pulled the cowl back, the cool air of the cave a welcome relief on his sweaty face. He held out the data drive. "You disobeyed a direct order," Bruce said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I know," Izuku replied, his voice his own again, tired but steady. "You engaged the enemy. You revealed yourself. You left 2 witnesses who will tell everyone a demon in a bat costume is haunting Detonarat warehouses. You compromised the entire operation." "I know," Izuku repeated. He met the old man's icy glare. "But he would have died. I couldn't just let him die. That's not what a hero does." He pushed the drive into Bruce's hand. "The mission is complete. The primary objective was achieved. And no one died. That has to matter." Bruce looked down at the small, black rectangle in his palm, then back up at the defiant, exhausted boy standing before him. He saw the dirt on his cheek, the fierce, unwavering conviction in his green eyes. He saw a boy who had been given incredible power and, at the first critical juncture, had chosen to risk everything not for the mission, but for a single, insignificant human life. He saw a fool. He saw a hero. He saw a reflection, faint and distorted by the years, of another boy, in another cave, who would have made the exact same, idiotic, reckless, noble choice. The fury in Bruce's expression did not vanish, but it was tempered by something else, something ancient and deeply buried. He turned without a word and limped over to the central computer, inserting the drive. Lines of code began to scroll across the massive screen. Izuku stood there, waiting for the verdict. "The suit's internal diagnostics show a microfracture in the left gauntlet from your uncontrolled entry into the facility," Bruce said, his back still to Izuku. His voice was gruff, devoid of any emotion. "It will require a polymer reinfusion and a stress test." He turned his head slightly, his piercing eye fixing Izuku with a look that was no longer just assessing a tool, but evaluating a student. "Meet me in the workshop at 0600. You're going to learn how to maintain your own equipment." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't praise. It was a command. A continuation. The test was over. Izuku had failed in almost every way, and somehow he had passed. The next 3 months were a descent into a special kind of hell, one meticulously designed by the unforgiving mind of Bruce Wayne. Izuku learned that the physical exhaustion of his first night in the suit was merely a gentle introduction. The true cost of wearing the cowl was paid not just in sweat and blood, but in pieces of his soul he hadn't known were negotiable. His days became a fractured, exhausting blur. By day, he was Izuku Midoriya, a listless high school student who was growing alarmingly thin and pale, who fell asleep in his history classes and gave vague, evasive answers to his mother's increasingly worried questions. Inkle Midoriya knew something was wrong. Her son, once so vibrant and full of nervous energy, was now a ghost in their own small apartment. He had dark circles under his eyes that seemed permanently etched into his skin, and a haunted, distant look that frightened her more than any failing grade. She would leave him his favorite meals, only to find them untouched hours later. She tried to talk to him, but it was like speaking to a reflection in dark water. The boy was there, but the depths were inaccessible. Every evening, as the programmed rain began its sterile cleansing of Neo Musafu, Izuku would slip out, a shadow disappearing into the forgotten parts of the city, making his way to the dilapidated Wayne estate. His nights were not his own. They belonged to Bruce. They belonged to the Bat. The training was relentless, a brutalist masterpiece of physical and psychological conditioning. It began each night at 0600, or rather 1800 hours, as Bruce insisted on using a 24-hour clock with military precision. The first hour was always pure, agonizing physical conditioning. Bruce could no longer demonstrate the exercises himself, his ruined body a prison, but he didn't need to. The Batcave's advanced holographic projectors could create a perfect, spectral image of a younger, prime Batman, a silent, powerful phantom that would guide Izuku through the routines. He was forced to push his body to its absolute limits, and then far beyond. He did pull-ups on the cavern's rock faces until his arms screamed and his palms bled. He ran for miles on a high-resistance treadmill that simulated the treacherous, debris-strewn rooftops of a decaying city. He practiced acrobatics in a zero-gravity chamber, the suit's boot jets his only means of control, learning to master the three-dimensional battlefield of a futuristic metropolis. Bruce would sit at the main console, a dark, motionless sentinel, monitoring Izuku's vitals on a screen. "Your heart rate is spiking beyond optimal combat parameters." His voice would crackle in Izuku's ear, cold and detached. "Control your breathing. Panic is a luxury you cannot afford. An enemy will hear it. They will smell it. It will make them bold." After the physical conditioning came combat simulation. Izuku had spent his life analyzing fights, but he had never truly been in one. He knew the theory, but his body was an unwritten page. Bruce's method of teaching was not gentle. The same holographic system that provided a training partner could also create entire combat scenarios, populating the training floor with a dozen virtual opponents. They were programmed with the fighting styles of every type of criminal Bruce had ever faced, from simple street thugs to highly trained League assassins. At first, Izuku was destroyed. He relied on the suit's strength, swinging wild, powerful punches that the nimble holograms would easily evade before swarming him. The simulation delivered painful, but non-lethal, electrical shocks with every registered hit. Izuku would often end the session collapsed on the floor, his body twitching, his every muscle screaming. "Brute force is a tool, not a solution." Bruce's voice would echo in the dark cave as Izuku gasped for breath on the cold floor. "You are not All Might. You cannot afford to level a city block to stop a single man. You are a surgeon. Precise. Efficient. Every movement must have a purpose. Your greatest weapon is not in your gauntlet, it is in your head." Slowly, painstakingly, Izuku began to learn. Bruce taught him a hybrid fighting style, a brutal fusion of dozens of martial arts, streamlined for efficiency and psychological impact. It was less about honorable combat, and more about ending a confrontation as quickly and decisively as possible. Izuku learned to use the suit's technology as an extension of his body, a burst from a boot jet to add force to a kick, a flick of the wrist to deploy a batarang as a distraction, the sudden flare of the crimson symbol on his chest to momentarily blind and disorient an opponent. He learned that a fight could be won before the first punch was ever thrown. This was the part of the training that unsettled him the most, the lessons in fear. "A quirk is a declaration," Bruce explained one night, as they stood before a glass case containing a tattered, fear-toxin-laced scarecrow mask. "It announces to the world what its wielder can do. It is a known quantity. You have no such luxury. Your power must be a mystery. It must be whatever your enemy fears most. They must believe you are something more than a man. Something else." He made Izuku study psychology. Not the dry, academic theories from textbooks, but the raw, primal mechanics of human terror. He analyzed recordings from Bruce's old case files, watching criminals break down and confess their sins to a terrifying silhouette in a dark room. "Observe the breathing," Bruce would point out, his voice a clinical whisper. "The dilated pupils. The involuntary tremor in the hands. He is not afraid of being hurt. He is afraid of the unknown. He doesn't know what you are, what you're capable of, or why you're there. In that uncertainty, his own mind will create a monster far more terrifying than you could ever be." Izuku was forced to practice this in the cave's darkest corners. He learned to move without a sound, his footsteps silenced by the suit's soft soles. He learned to use the darkness as a cloak, to appear and disappear in the blink of an eye. He practiced a low, guttural growl, modulated by the suit's speakers, that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of a listener. He hated it. It felt wrong. It was the tactic of a villain, not a hero. A hero was supposed to inspire hope, not terror. Hope is for the civilians, Bruce countered when Izuku voiced his concerns. It is the light on the horizon, but to create that light, you must be willing to become the darkness that consumes all other darkness. You are the protector of the innocent, not the friend of the guilty. There is a difference. The lessons continued. Forensics. Criminology. Demolitions. Infiltration. He spent hours in the Batcave's crime lab, analyzing synthetic samples of evidence, learning to spot the telltale residue of a specific explosive or the microscopic inconsistencies in a forged document. He learned how to bypass security systems, not with brute force like Scramble, but with a nuanced understanding of their inner workings, exploiting loopholes and backdoors that only their designers knew existed. His hero analysis for the future notebooks took on a new, darker dimension. The pages, now digital, were no longer filled with hopeful sketches of heroes, but with cold, hard data. He diagrammed the chain of command in the Yakuza. He mapped out the patrol routes and response times of the pro-heroes, not to emulate them, but to avoid them. He analyzed the psychological profiles of Neo Musafu's most dangerous criminals, identifying their fears, their pressure points, their weaknesses. His mind, already sharp, was being honed into a weapon of surgical precision. After 3 months of this torturous education, the night finally came. Izuku had just finished a combat simulation, defeating 12 holographic opponents in under a minute through a fluid combination of stealth, misdirection, and precise, incapacitating strikes. He was breathing heavily, but his recovery time had improved dramatically. Bruce watched from the console, his expression as impassive as ever. Acceptable, he grunted, the highest praise Izuku had yet received. Your movements are becoming efficient. Your reliance on the suit's strength has diminished. You are beginning to think like a hunter. He brought up a map of the city on the main screen. A specific district, a rundown residential area on the edge of the gleaming corporate center, was highlighted in red. Tonight you go on patrol, Bruce announced. Izuku froze. The words he had dreamed of hearing his entire life now filled him with a cold dread. This wasn't a simulation. This wasn't a test in an empty warehouse. This was real. The Hibari district has seen a 200% increase in violent muggings and assaults over the past 6 weeks. Bruce explained, his voice all business. The local pro-hero precinct is understaffed, their budget cut by the city council to fund a new statue of Endeavor. The people there are afraid. They are your testing ground. His objective was simple. You will patrol the district from the rooftops. You will observe. You will listen. If you see a crime in progress, you will intervene. You will neutralize the threat, and you will disappear before the authorities arrive. You will not speak to the victims. You will not speak to the police. You are to be a ghost. A rumor. Nothing more. Izuku suited up, his movements now practiced and sure. As the cowl sealed him in, the familiar rush of sensory data flooded his consciousness. This time, however, it wasn't an overwhelming cacophony. He could filter it, focus it. He was in control. He flew from the cave, the suit's systems a familiar second skin. He soared through the night, a black specter against the neon-drenched sky. He landed silently on the roof of a rundown apartment building in the Hibari district, his magnetic soles clinging to the worn concrete. Below, the streets were a world away from the gleaming spires of the city center. The lights were dim and flickering. The storefronts were barred. People hurried along the sidewalks, their heads down, their shoulders hunched. The air was thick with a palpable sense of neglect and fear. For 2 hours he saw nothing. He moved from rooftop to rooftop, a silent sentinel, his enhanced hearing scanning the alleys and streets below. He heard arguments behind thin apartment walls, the lonely cries of infants, the distant wail of a police siren. It was a tapestry of ordinary, mundane misery. He began to think the night would be a bust. Then he heard it. A small, sharp cry of fear, quickly muffled. It came from a narrow alley 2 blocks to the east. Izuku's heart leaped into his throat. He took off, his boot jets firing in a silent, controlled burst. He flew low and fast, a streak of black against the grimy brickwork. He landed without a sound on the edge of a roof overlooking the alley. Below, 3 men had a young woman pinned against the wall. They were large and brutish, one of them holding a hand over her mouth while another tried to wrestle her purse away from her. The third stood lookout, a cruel smirk on his face. They all wore jackets with the same crude, spray-painted logo of a snarling Oni. A local street gang. Izuku felt a surge of pure, white-hot rage. This was it. This was why he was doing this. For her. For everyone like her, abandoned by the gleaming, commercialized world of heroes. Remember your training. Bruce's voice, a cold anchor in the storm of Izuku's emotions, echoed in his ear. Do not engage in a prolonged fight. Use the environment. Use their fear. Izuku took a deep, centering breath. He analyzed the scene. The alley was narrow, cluttered with overflowing dumpsters and loose debris. The only light source was a single, flickering fluorescent bulb above a doorway, casting long, dancing shadows. Perfect. He dropped. He didn't use his boot jets. He just fell, a silent drop of 20 feet. He landed on top of one of the large metal dumpsters with a deafening boom that echoed through the alley like a thunderclap. The 3 thugs spun around, their eyes wide with shock. They saw a figure, wreathed in shadow, standing atop the dumpster. A tall, dark silhouette with pointed ears and a glowing red symbol on its chest that seemed to pulse like a malevolent heart. What the hell is that? The lookout stammered, taking an involuntary step back. Izuku didn't speak. He just tilted his head, the featureless black mask of the cowl a terrifying void. The thug holding the woman made a fatal mistake. Thinking he was just some kid in a costume, he let her go and drew a rusty pipe from his belt. Get him! He snarled. That was all the opening Izuku needed. He fired a grapnel from his gauntlet. The hook shot past the thug's head and embedded itself in the brick wall behind him. Izuku triggered the retraction motor. The cable snapped taut, and he was yanked forward, a black projectile hurtling through the air. He tucked and rolled, his armored boot connecting squarely with the pipe-wielding thug's jaw. The crack of bone was sickeningly loud. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he even landed. The other 2 were frozen in terror for a split second. It was a second too long. Izuku landed in a crouch. He slapped a small, disc-shaped object onto the side of the metal dumpster. He pressed a button on his gauntlet. The disc emitted a high-frequency sonic pulse, a piercing, disorienting shriek that sent the remaining 2 thugs staggering back, clutching their ears. He moved through their disorientation. He wasn't a brawler. He was a phantom. A precise, brutal strike to the lookout's knee buckled his leg, sending him down with a cry of agony. Izuku didn't even pause. He spun, his other hand deploying a batarang. It wasn't one of the sharp-edged ones. It was a blunt, weighted impact projectile. It hit the last thug square in the forehead with a dull thud. The man's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed in a heap. The entire confrontation had taken less than 10 seconds. Silence descended on the alley, broken only by the whimpering of the injured thug and the terrified, ragged breathing of the young woman. Izuku stood over the fallen criminals, his own heart pounding with the primal thrill of victory. He had done it. He had saved her. He turned to look at the woman, his instincts screaming at him to ask if she was okay, to offer her comfort, to be the hero he had always dreamed of being. But Bruce's words echoed in his mind. You will not speak to the victims. You are a ghost. The woman was huddled against the far wall, staring at him. Her face was a mixture of gratitude and pure, undiluted terror. She wasn't looking at a savior. She was looking at a monster who had just dispatched 3 other monsters with terrifying efficiency. He had won the fight, but as he looked at her terrified face, he felt a profound sense of loss. He had protected her, but he hadn't made her feel safe. He was just a different kind of darkness. A distant siren began to wail. The authorities were coming. Izuku fired his grapnel to the rooftop, the whir of the motor startlingly loud in the quiet alley. He ascended into the darkness, melting back into the shadows from whence he came. He glanced down one last time. The woman was still staring at the spot where he had been, her hand clasped over her mouth, as if she had just seen an apparition. He returned to the Batcave, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving a hollow, empty feeling in its place. He had succeeded. He had followed his orders. But it didn't feel like a victory. He found Bruce in front of the main computer, watching the playback of the incident from the suit's recorded feed. "The takedowns were adequate," Bruce said, not turning around. "Your reaction time was slow by 0.8 seconds. You exposed yourself for too long after the initial engagement. But the objective was completed. The criminals were neutralized. The civilian was unharmed." Izuku pulled off his cowl, the cool air feeling good on his skin. "She was scared of me," he said, his voice flat. "Good," Bruce replied. "Fear will keep her out of dark alleys in the future. You gave her a valuable lesson." "That's not what I meant," Izuku snapped, his frustration boiling over. "I'm supposed to be a hero. A hero makes people feel safe, not terrified." Finally, Bruce turned in his chair. He swiveled slowly to face Izuku, and for the first time, the old man's face held something other than contempt or clinical detachment. It was a deep, ancient sadness. "You think I enjoyed being a creature of the night?" he asked, his voice a low, mournful rasp. "You think I enjoyed seeing the fear in the eyes of the people I saved? It is the price, boy. The sacrifice. The world you and I operate in is not black and white. It is a suffocating, endless gray. You can be a symbol of hope, a shining knight for the people to adore, and you will be bound by their rules, constrained by their laws, and ultimately, you will fail them when the real darkness comes, because you will be unwilling to make the hard choices." He gestured a weary hand at the cave around them. "Or, you can be what is necessary. You can be the thing that hunts the other things that go bump in the night. You can bear the burden of their fear, so that they don't have to be afraid of anything else. You cannot be both. I tried. And I paid for it with everything I ever loved." His gaze drifted towards the darkened memorial case, the one holding the small, scorched uniform. The unspoken grief in the cave was suddenly suffocating. Izuku felt the weight of a history he couldn't possibly comprehend settling on his shoulders. He understood then. The training, the pain, the psychological conditioning, it wasn't just to make him a better fighter. It was to prepare him for this. For the loneliness. For the moral compromises. For the soul-crushing burden of being the Batman. His new life stretched out before him, a long, dark road with no end in sight. He was no longer just a boy playing dress-up. He was an inheritor. A legacy. He was the city's ghost, its dark rumor, its necessary monster. The media would find a name for him soon enough. They would call him the Neobat, the Flying Phantom, the Shadow of Musafu. They would debate whether he was a hero or a villain. But Izuku knew the truth. He was neither. He was simply the one who was willing to walk in the dark. The data drive Izuku had risked his life to retrieve was both a goldmine and a fortress. Bruce, with his decades of experience in cryptography, had managed to slice through the outer layers of its security with the ease of a master surgeon. The drive contained what they suspected: detailed shipping manifests, illegal transaction logs, and coded payment receipts that tied Detonarat's cybernetics directly to the proliferation of black market quirk enhancement tech. It was the smoking gun. But the most crucial files, the ones that hinted at the project's true purpose and named the people at the top of the pyramid, were sealed within a core nexus protected by an encryption protocol unlike anything Bruce had ever seen. "It's quantum reactive," the old man grumbled one night, his face illuminated by the scrolling, incomprehensible lines of code on the main monitor. He hadn't slept in what looked like days. "It doesn't just use a key. It constantly changes its own lock based on a quantum algorithm that's being broadcast from an external source. It's like trying to pick a lock that's rebuilding itself 1,000,000 times a second. So it's impossible to crack?" Izuku asked, looking over Bruce's shoulder. He was in the middle of his nightly routine, disassembling and cleaning the microservos in his gauntlets. The meticulous, repetitive work helped him think. "Nothing is impossible," Bruce corrected, his voice sharp with irritation. "Just computationally expensive. It would take this system," he gestured to the Bat computer, a machine that made government supercomputers look like pocket calculators, nearly a decade to brute force a solution. "We don't have a decade. This signal, the one driving the algorithm, it's localized. Powerful. Somewhere in the city, there's a quantum data hub, a nexus, broadcasting this signal. If we can get close enough, If we can tap directly into that broadcast, I can mirror the algorithm and unlock the files. Where is it? Izuku asked, setting down a perfectly clean servo. Bruce brought up a map of Neo Musafu, a series of concentric rings pulsing from a central point. The signal is shielded, bounced off a dozen relay satellites to mask its origin, but the energy signature is unique. I've narrowed it down to a 4-block radius in the Shiozaki Tech Park. He zoomed in on a specific building, and the highest concentration of quantum-resonant energy is emanating from this tower, the Ketsubutsu Applied Sciences Institute. The name was familiar to Izuku. It was a prestigious but notoriously underfunded university, known for producing brilliant engineers and physicists who were immediately poached by megacorporations like Detonarat. It's a civilian target, a school, Izuku said, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. It'll be full of students, faculty. The hub will be in a restricted area, Bruce countered. A server farm, a research lab in the sub-basement. Minimal foot traffic, especially at night. Your objective is the same as always: get in, find the hub, plant this. He held up a small, spider-like device with a single glowing optic, and get out. The tarantula will tap into their network, mirror the broadcast, and feed it back to me. No one will ever know you were there. The plan was solid. It was the kind of stealth mission he was becoming accustomed to. Still, the thought of operating in a place full of innocent people made him nervous. In the abandoned districts, the only lives at stake were his and the criminals. Here, the potential for collateral damage was infinitely higher. 2 nights later, Izuku stood perched atop a neighboring skyscraper, the Ketsubutsu Institute, a gleaming tower of glass and steel before him. The rain had just begun its nightly cycle, washing the neon glow of the city across the building's facade. He scanned the structure, his suit's thermal vision overlaying the architectural blueprints Bruce had acquired. The main data hub is on sub-level 4, Bruce's voice crackled in his ear. But it's a closed system, physically disconnected from the main network. No remote access. You'll have to go in physically. I've identified a maintenance access port on the 47th floor, behind a solar panel array. It leads to a central service shaft that runs the entire height of the building. It will be your elevator. Izuku took a running start and leaped from the edge of the roof. For a terrifying second, he was in freefall, the wind screaming past his cowl. Then he fired his boot jets, the controlled burn arresting his descent and propelling him across the chasm between the buildings. He was getting better at this, his movements smoother, more confident. He landed silently on a narrow ledge on the 47th floor, his magnetic saws locking him securely to the surface. He located the panel, pried it open, and slipped into the darkness of the service shaft. It was a vertical maze of pipes, conduits, and ventilation ducts. He began his descent using short, controlled bursts from his jets, the schematics guiding him through the labyrinth. He reached sub-level 4 and found the access grate leading into the server corridor. The air here was cold, the only sound the low, constant hum of trillions of calculations being performed every second. He moved silently down the hallway, a ghost in the machine. He found the quantum data hub, a massive, spherical chamber of chrome and pulsating blue light, isolated behind a thick glass wall. "I'm here," he whispered. "The room is sealed. No visible doors. Looks like a magnetic lock." "Expected," Bruce replied. "The control panel should be on the adjacent wall. Its security is state-of-the-art. You won't be able to hack it. You'll have to overload it. Channel a precise 300,000 volt charge into the primary power conduit. It should trigger a system reboot, during which the magnetic lock will disengage for 3 seconds. Izuku located the panel. It was more complex than the simple keypad at the warehouse. He was about to begin his work when he heard a sound. A soft, metallic click from further down the corridor. He froze, melting back into the shadows and activating his camouflage. He held his breath, listening. A figure emerged from a side maintenance corridor. It was a young woman, not much older than him, with short brown hair and a determined look in her warm, expressive eyes. She was wearing a simple Ketsubutsu student jumpsuit, but she moved with a quiet, focused intensity. In her hands she held a data slate and a complex-looking device covered in wires and antennae. Izuku watched, his mind racing. A student? What is she doing down here at this hour? The young woman walked right up to the same control panel Izuku was about to overload. She placed her strange device against it, and her fingers began to fly across the screen of her data slate, typing lines of code with a speed and fluency that rivaled Bruce's. A series of green lights on her device began to blink in a complex sequence. Her device is handshaking with the door's security protocol. Bruce's voice was a low, intrigued murmur in Izuku's ear. She isn't trying to break the encryption. She's tricking the system into thinking her device is a registered diagnostic tool. It's brilliant. Who is she? With a soft chime, the panel flashed green. There was a loud hiss, and the massive door to the quantum hub slid open. The young woman smiled, a small, triumphant expression, and slipped inside. The door hissed shut behind her. Izuku was stunned. She had bypassed the system that Bruce himself had deemed impenetrable by conventional means. He had two choices: follow his original plan, which would likely alert her to his presence and could potentially be dangerous, or wait and observe. He chose to wait. Through the thick glass of the chamber, he watched her. She wasn't stealing anything. She walked to a specific server rack, one that was conspicuously newer than the others, and attached another device to it. Her data slate lit up, and she began what looked like a massive data download. Suddenly, a new sound echoed down the corridor. Heavy footsteps. The jingle of security gear. Intruder alert on sublevel 4, a gruff voice crackled over a radio. Unknown energy signature detected at the quantum hub. Two teams converging. The girl's head snapped up. Her triumphant expression vanished, replaced by pure panic. The data transfer on her slate was only at 40%. She looked at the door, then back at her screen, her mind clearly racing. She was trapped. They'd detected her, Bruce stated calmly. Deadnerat. Not Institute security. Their energy signatures matched the guards from the warehouse. They're monitoring this place. It all clicked into place for Izuku. This hub wasn't just a university project. It was Deadnerat's. They were using the school as a cover, a place to house their encryption nexus. And this girl, she was trying to expose them, just like him. He couldn't let them take her. He stepped out of the shadows as two Deadnerat enforcers, armed with advanced pulse rifles, rounded the far end of the corridor. There she is! In the hub! One of them yelled. The girl inside jumped, her eyes wide with terror as she saw the armed men. Then her gaze shifted, and she saw him. A tall, black silhouette of a demon standing silently in the hallway. Her fear somehow intensified. Izuku didn't hesitate. He fired his grapnel into the ceiling, swinging over the guards' heads as they raised their rifles. He dropped behind them, a silent predator. Before they could turn, he slammed their heads together with a sickening crunch of helmet on helmet. They dropped to the floor, unconscious. Another team of 3 guards appeared at the other end of the hall. They opened fire, bolts of sizzling blue energy filling the narrow corridor. Izuku moved, a blur of motion. He used the server racks as cover, the energy bolts exploding against the metal, showering him with sparks. He threw a smoke pellet. Thick, gray smoke instantly filled the hallway, his thermal vision cutting through it as if it weren't there. The guards began firing blindly into the smoke. He used their panic against them. He ricocheted 2 batarangs off the walls, the projectiles striking the rifles from their hands. He closed the distance in the chaos, a disorienting presence in the smoke. A precise nerve strike to the neck of one guard, a sweeping leg trip that sent the second crashing into the third. It was over in seconds. He turned back to the quantum hub. The door was still sealed. The girl was staring at him, her face pressed against the glass, her expression a mixture of awe and terror. The data transfer on her slate dinged. 100%. Complete. He pointed to the control panel, then held up 3 fingers. She seemed to understand. He placed his hand on the power conduit. 3, 2, 1. He unleashed the charge. The lights in the hall flickered, and the door hissed open. Come on! He growled, his voice a low, modulated command. She scrambled out, clutching her data slate to her chest as if it were a holy relic. What are you? She stammered, looking up at his terrifying, featureless mask. No time, he said, grabbing her arm. He wasn't gentle. This way. He pulled her towards the maintenance shaft he'd come from. Alarms were blaring throughout the facility now. They had seconds. Wait, she said, pulling back. My gear. She pointed to the device she'd used to open the door. Leave it, he commanded. No. My family spent years developing that frequency-mimicking technology. Degenerate stole it. I'm not letting them have it back. Her voice was filled with a fiery, stubborn determination that surprised him. He glanced back down the corridor. More footsteps. He made a split-second decision. He let her go, and while she scooped up her device, he planted Bruce's tarantula onto the hub's mainframe. 2 birds, 1 stone. Done! Let's go! She yelled. He grabbed her again, this time more carefully, putting an arm around her waist. Hold on, he warned. Before she could ask what he meant, he fired his boot jets, launching them vertically up the service shaft. The girl screamed, a sound of pure, undiluted shock and terror, as the floors of the Ketsubutsu Institute blurred past them in a dizzying, upward rush. He burst out of the roof access port and into the rainy night sky. He landed on the roof, gently setting the trembling, hyperventilating young woman down. You can fly, she gasped, her eyes wide as she looked from his smoking boots to the city sprawling below. Limited propulsion, he corrected, the modulated voice sounding absurdly clinical. He turned to leave. His work was done. Wait! She called out, finding her feet. Thank you? You saved my life. They would have. I don't know what they would have done. He paused, his back to her. He remembered Bruce's orders, no witnesses. No interaction. But this felt different. She wasn't a random victim. She was a soldier in the same war. You were foolish to come alone, he said, his voice a low growl. She bristled at that, her fear momentarily replaced by indignation. I didn't have a choice. My parents were brilliant scientists. They developed a way to manipulate localized gravity fields, a clean energy source. Degenerate offered to partner with them, then stole their research, ruined their reputations, and bankrupted them. The data I just downloaded proves it. I had to get it back. I don't have a supersuit and rocket boots. I just have my brain. Izuku was silent. He understood her desperation perfectly. It was the same fire that had driven him to that dockside warehouse. The data you have is part of a larger conspiracy, he said, deciding to give her a piece of the truth. Degenerate is doing more than just stealing tech. They are dangerous. More dangerous than you know. Don't go to the police. Don't go to the pro-heroes. They are all compromised or incompetent. Stay hidden. Analyze your data. And do not do something so reckless again. He turned to leap from the building, but her voice stopped him one last time. I'm not scared of you, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Whoever you are, you're on our side. My name is Achiko Uraraka. If you ever need help, if you ever need someone who understands the tech these bastards are using, find me. He didn't reply. He simply leaped into the night, his black form disappearing into the manufactured rain, leaving Achiko Uraraka alone on a rooftop, clutching the key to her family's salvation, her heart pounding with the impossible reality of what she had just witnessed. Back in the Batcave, Bruce was ecstatic, a state which manifested as a slightly less severe scowl. The tarantula is online. The data is pouring in. This Uraraka girl, her frequency-mimicking device is ingenious. A mind like that could be a powerful asset. He looked at Izuku. You broke protocol again. You interacted with a civilian. She's not a civilian, Izuku countered, pulling off his cowl. Not anymore. She's a victim fighting back. We need people like that. Bruce didn't argue. He just grunted and turned back to the screen. Perhaps, he murmured. But allies also create liabilities. The unspoken words hung in the air, and liabilities get killed. The city was buzzing. In the 2 weeks following the Ketsubutsu incident, whispers of the Neobat had solidified into a full-blown urban legend. Eyewitness accounts, though panicked and contradictory, all agreed on a few key details. A winged, demonic figure, impossibly fast, who hunted criminals in the dead of night. The media was having a field day, running speculative news pieces and spooky exposes. Most pro-heroes dismissed it as a hoax, a mass delusion born from the city's anxieties. But some were not so sure. The Endeavor Agency, still the #1 hero agency in Japan despite its namesake's retirement, was taking the matter very seriously. Unregistered vigilantism was a direct threat to the carefully controlled, corporatized system of heroism they had built. It was bad for business, and so they had assigned their top rookie, their most promising and ferociously powerful new sidekick, to the case. Izuku was on a routine patrol, soaring between the residential towers of the Eastern District, when his suit's proximity sensors screamed, "Warning! High-velocity projectile approaching. Vector, aft starboard." Izuku twisted in midair, a maneuver that would have been impossible a month ago. A brilliant, fiery explosion blossomed in the space he had just occupied, the concussive force buffeting him like a physical blow. The heat was so intense it momentarily overloaded his suit's thermal sensors. "Report!" Bruce's voice snapped in his ear. "I'm under attack!" Izuku yelled, spinning to face his assailant. There, hovering 100 meters away, propelled by controlled explosions from his palms, was a figure he knew as well as his own reflection. The sleek, black and orange costume. The grenade-shaped gauntlets. The feral, triumphant grin. Katsuki Bakugo. Or as the world now knew him, the pro-hero sidekick, Dynamite. "There you are, you bastard!" Bakugo roared, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Thought you could play bogeyman in my city? I'm gonna smoke you out of whatever hole you crawled out of and drag your ass into the light." Another explosion propelled him forward like a missile. Izuku dove, the world a blur of motion. He was fast, but Bakugo was a force of nature. "This is Dynamite of the Endeavor Agency." Bakugo's voice boomed, likely amplified by his mask. "You are in violation of the Metahuman Vigilantism Act. Surrender now, and you might still get a plea bargain. Do not engage him." Bruce's voice was a low, urgent command. "He is a top-tier pro. His quirk output is catastrophic. The suit cannot withstand a direct hit from his AP shot. Your objective is to escape." Escape was easier said than done. Bakugo was relentless, a predator in his natural element. He herded Izuku through the concrete canyons of the city, cutting off escape routes with precisely aimed explosions. He wasn't just trying to hit him, he was trying to corner him. Izuku flew into a narrow gap between two towering apartment complexes, hoping to lose him in the labyrinthine structures. It was a mistake. It was exactly what Bakugo wanted. The blonde hero appeared at the end of the alley, blocking his exit, a sadistic grin spreading across his face. "Nowhere to run, you cowardly piece of trash," Bakugo snarled, raising his gauntlets. Izuku's mind raced, his analytical brain kicking into hyperdrive. He's a powerhouse, but his fighting style is all forward momentum. He relies on overwhelming his opponents. He doesn't expect a tactical response. "The water towers," Izuku said into the comlink, spotting the large, cylindrical tanks on the roofs of the buildings. "They're old, pre-quirk infrastructure. If I can rupture them, the water pressure combined with the sudden temperature drop could create a large enough smoke screen for you to escape." Bruce finished, his mind perfectly in sync with Izuku's. "It's a risky, but viable strategy. Do it." As Bakugo prepared to unleash a massive blast, Izuku fired 2 grapnel lines, not at the opposite wall to escape, but upwards, embedding them in the bases of the 2 largest water towers. He angled his body, activated his boot jets, and with the full amplified strength of the suit he pulled. The sound of groaning, shearing metal was deafening. Bakugo paused, his eyes widening in confusion. With a final, agonizing shriek of tortured steel, the supports gave way. 2 colossal waterfalls, thousands of gallons of cold water, cascaded down into the narrow alleyway. The deluge hit Bakugo like a physical blow, dousing his sparks and sending him tumbling. More importantly, the cold water instantly reacted with the superheated air from his explosions, creating a massive, billowing cloud of steam that filled the entire alley, blinding him completely. "What the?" Bakugo sputtered, soaked and furious. "You damn coward! Fight me!" But Izuku was already gone. Under the cover of the steam, he had launched himself straight up, disappearing into the night sky. He circled back from a safe distance, watching through his thermal vision. He saw Bakugo, enraged, blasting his way out of the steam-filled alley, screaming curses into the empty air. Izuku noticed something. As Bakugo took off, the hero instinctively glanced over his shoulder, checking his blind spot. It was a small, almost insignificant movement. But Izuku recognized it. It was a specific tactical tic, a habit Bakugo had developed during combat training in middle school to compensate for a slight weakness on his left side. Izuku knew it because he had documented it, years ago, in a battered, burned notebook. He gets a glimpse of the bat's fighting style and it feels familiar, the outline had predicted. This was the seed of that familiarity. His technique is impressive, but his temperament is a critical flaw, Bruce observed, his voice a cold, analytical assessment in Izuku's ear. He is all power and no patience. Arrogant. Predictable. You exploited that. But do not underestimate him again. He will adapt. And next time, he will be aiming to kill. Izuku watched Bakugo's receding form disappear into the city lights. The rivalry he thought he had left behind in the schoolyard had just been recontextualized on a citywide scale. Bakugo, the symbol of the legitimate hero world, the prodigy with limitless power, versus him, the quirkless ghost, the symbol of a darker, more necessary form of justice. He had found an unlikely ally in Ochiko Uraraka, a person who understood the fight from the inside. And he had found his oldest, most dangerous rival in Katsuki Bakugo, the hero tasked with bringing him down. The board was set. The players were in position. The war for Neo Musafu's soul had just begun.